about whether Putin saw this coming. Do you think, I mean, you've spoken before about how he likes chess and he likes judo, but this is really just a perfect example of a chess and judo player or athlete using his enemies, own inertia and all of that. How much, I mean, I remember when I was saying that Putin wouldn't invade Ukraine because it was a mad idea. Well, based on what's happened since, it's not looking so crazy anymore. How much did all of this play into Putin's decision to invade Ukraine?
Well, that's a really good question. They must, in deciding to go ahead with the invasion, obviously they planned it well in advance, but the best information I have, and I don't want to, I can't completely verify this. I got to tell you, Nick, it is extremely difficult to get reliable information. Both sides lie. Both sides engage in propaganda. That's typical of any war, so no surprise there. But there are some good sources, but boy, do you have to work hard to find them. Some military officers on Telegraph, that's another social platform, some on Twitter, some websites, but kind of off the run websites, but they have good analysts. So there is information out there, but it's very hard to come by. But there is a view with some support that Putin did not make the decision to actually invade until perhaps 48 hours before the invasion. Now, were they planning it? Was it a possibility? Absolutely. And that had been clear for 7 or 8 months. You don't move 15 divisions to a border without at least threatening and preparing for a possible invasion. So I'm not saying it came out of the blue, but the actual decision seems to have been made very late in the process for 2 reasons. One, Putin thought that the U.S. And the EU would believe him. They said he's been saying he would do this since 2008. I mean, 14 years. And then in 2014, when the U.S. and CIA and MI6, U.S. and UK sponsored the coup in Ukraine that kicked out a pro-Russian president, replaced him with a Western puppet, and then Putin took Crimea, just the next Crimea. So it's not as if he didn't tell us what he was going to do. It's not as if he didn't back up his words with actions. And it's not as if he didn't make his intentions clear. And he thought that based on that, the U.S. would get the wake-up call. And he wasn't asking for a lot. He wanted Ukraine would not join NATO. That had to be, a kind of ironclad. Ukraine would be neutral. It wasn't even clear that he would have minded so much if they joined the EU, but they would have a neutral status, very much like Finland and very much like Austria during most of the Cold War. Austria was not ruled by communists, but they were neutral and didn't choose sides until pretty much the Cold War was over. Finland's an interesting case, kind of going through the kind of tipping one way. We'll see how that turns out. But so they want Ukrainian neutrality. Ukraine would not join NATO. There would certainly be no NATO forces on Ukrainian soil. And that would be that. Oh, and also autonomy, not annexation, but autonomy for the Russian-speaking areas in what's called the Donbass, which are Donetsk and Luhansk, and some peripheral areas. He couldn't get it. He couldn't get commitments on any of those things. And then it appeared that Ukraine itself was preparing to invade itself. In other words, the Central Army in Ukraine was prepared to invade the Donbass to suppress the pro-Russian or pro-autonomy elements. So they had kind of positioned themselves as independent, certainly autonomous, maybe even independent republics with their own forces. So the Putin's action is very much like what Israel did in the Yom Kippur War in 1973, where everyone blamed Israel for starting the war. Well, Israel had solid intelligence that Egypt and Syria were going to invade the next day. So, you're always better off going first. So, Israeli tanks rolled. They did start that war in the technical sense, but only because they knew they were going to be invaded themselves. So it was what's called a preemptive war. And so it looks like what Putin did was preemptive relative to the Donbass, knowing that the Ukrainians were going to invade themselves to suppress those pro-Russian forces. So the point being, was something like it planned and threatened and possible for a long time? Yes, but the actual decision might have been made just days before. But of course, once you're in, you're in. And I've never seen a war that was easier to avoid, meaning all you had to do is give those commitments. Everyone calls it appeasement, but I call it realpolitik. It's when you're a weak power in between two major powers, you're a buffer state, whether you like it or not. And a buffer state that favors one side or the other. That's what the Soviet Union was. Here was an opportunity to be neutral. You didn't have to be pro-Russia, but you couldn't be pro-West either. You just had to be neutral. They had that opportunity. They didn't take advantage of it. And there's never been a war that's easier to end. You could end this war in 72 hours by agreeing to what I just described. Of course, you could have avoided the war by agreeing to the same thing. The difference now is that you'll still have to agree to that, but you will have lost a third of your territory. So the Zelensky, this idea that he's the new Churchill, I mean, what nonsense. He's an inept, corrupt oligarch who's pretty good at propaganda. I'm up against the Ukrainian IT army on a daily basis. There are 400,000 volunteers around the world who put out a lot of propaganda, but they also look for people like me who are, I'm not pro-Russia. I mean, I have friends there, but I'm not pro-Russia. I'm pro-peace. I'm pro-America. I would think it'd be in America's best interest to end this war as quickly as possible. And too bad we had a massive diplomatic failure in failing to prevent it in the first place. But I'm pro getting it right, getting the analysis right, getting the facts right. You have to work hard to do that for the reason I mentioned. But as a result of that, you get attacked by bots. But I'm very good. I've actually, I'm a coder. I don't want to hold myself out as some IT pro, but I know code. I know reverse engineering. I know a bot when I see it. So I had to fight ISIS a few years ago. I was featured in an ISIS recruiting film, and I was getting a lot of Akbars in my Twitter feed, so I had to fend them off, and also some Obama robots. So I'm pretty seasoned at doing it. But it is interesting how extensive their propaganda effort is.
It still amazes me that they're so busy on social media of all places instead of taking to the battlefield. But I think you've offended everyone sort of equally. So we all hate you. And no one will agree with you. So as long as it's fair and even, I think that's fine.